Malfoy's eyes had returned to Hermione, who went slightly pink, but stared determinedly back at him. Harry knew exactly what was making Mr. Malfoy's lip curl. The Malfoys prided themselves on being purebloods. In other words, they considered anyone of Muggle descent, like Hermione, second class. However, under the gaze of the Minister of Magic, Mr. Malfoy didn't dare say anything. He nodded sneeringly to Mr. Weasley and continued down the line to his seats. Draco shot Harry, Ron, and Hermione one contemptuous look, then settled himself between his mother and father. "Slimy gits," Ron muttered, as he, Harry, and Hermione turned to face the pitch again. Next moment, Ludo Bagman had charged into the box. "Everyone ready?" he said, his round face gleaming like a great excited Edom. "Minister, ready to go?" "Ready when you are, Ludo," said Fudge comfortably. Ludo whipped out his wand, directed it at his own throat, and then said, "Sonorous," and then spoke over the roar of sound that had now filled the packed stadium. His voice echoed over them, booming into every corner of the stands. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, welcome to the final of the 422nd Quidditch World Cup." The spectators screamed and clapped. Thousands of flags waved, adding their discordant national anthems to the racket. The huge blackboard opposite them was wiped clear of the last message, "Bertie Bott's every flavoured beans, a risk with every mouthful," and now showed Bulgaria 0, Ireland 0. "And now, without further ado, allow me to introduce the Bulgarian team mascots." The right-hand side of the stands, which was a solid block of scarlet, roared its approval. "I wonder what they've brought," said Mr. Weasley, leaning forward in his seat. He suddenly wiped off his glasses and polished them hurriedly on his robes. "Vila! What a But 100 Vila were now gliding out onto the pitch, and Harry's question was answered for him. Vila were women, the most beautiful women Harry had ever seen, except that they couldn't be human. This puzzled Harry for a moment, while he tried to guess what exactly they could be. What could make their skin shine moon-bright like that, or their white gold hair fan out behind them without wind? But then the music started, and Harry stopped worrying about them not being human. In fact, he stopped worrying about anything at all. The Vila had started to dance, and Harry's mind had gone completely and blissfully blank. All that mattered in the world was that he kept watching the Vila, because if they stopped dancing, terrible things would happen. And as the Vila danced faster and faster, wild, half-formed thoughts started chasing through Harry's dazed mind. He wanted to do something very impressive right now. Jumping from the box into the stadium seemed a good idea, but would it be good enough? "Harry, what are you doing?" said Hermione's voice from a long way off. The music stopped, and Harry blinked. He was standing up, and one of his legs was resting in the wall of the box. Next to him, Ron was frozen in an attitude that looked as though he was about to dive from a springboard. Angry yells were filling the stadium. The crowd didn't want the Vila to go. Harry was with them. He would, of course, be supporting Bulgaria, and he wondered vaguely why he had a large green shamrock pinned to his chest. Ron, meanwhile, was absent-mindedly shredding the shamrock on his hat. Mr. Weasley, smiling slightly, leaned over to Ron and tugged the hat out of his hands. "You'll be wanting that," he said, "once Ireland have had their say." "Huh?" said Ron, staring open-mouthed at the Vila, who had now lined up along one side of the pitch. Hermione made a loud touching noise. She reached up and pulled Harry back into his seat. "Honestly," she said. "And now," roared Ludo Bagman's voice, "kindly put your wands in the air for the Irish national team mascots." Next moment, what seemed to be a great green and gold comet had come zooming into the stadium. It did one circuit of the stadium, then split into two smaller comets, each hurtling towards the goalposts. A rainbow arced suddenly across the pitch, connecting the two balls of light. The crowd oohed and awed, as though at a fireworks display. Now the rainbow faded, and the balls of light reunited. And merged. They had formed a great shimmering shamrock, which rose up into the sky and began to soar over the stands. Something like golden rain seemed to be falling from it. "Excellent!" yelled Ron, as the shamrock soared over their heads, and heavy gold coins rained from it, bouncing off their heads and seats. Squinting up at the shamrock, Harry realized that it was actually composed of thousands of tiny little bearded men with red waistcoats, each carrying a minute lamp of gold or green. "Leprechauns," said Mr. Weasley, over the tumultuous applause of the crowd, many of whom were still fighting and rummaging around under their chairs to retrieve the gold. "There you go," Ron yelled happily, stuffing the fistful of gold coins into Harry's hand. "For the omniculars. Now you got to buy me a Christmas present. Ha!" The great shamrock dissolved. The leprechauns drifted down onto the pitch on the opposite side from the villa and settled themselves cross-legged to watch the match. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, kindly welcome the Bulgarian national Quidditch team. I give you Dimitrov," a scarlet-clad figure on a broomstick, moving so fast it was blurred, shot out onto the pitch from the entrance far below, to wild applause from the Bulgarian supporters. "Ivanova," a second scarlet-robed player zoomed out. "Zokrav, Levski, Volchanov, Volkov, and Crumb." That's him! Yelled Ron, following Crumb with his omniculars. Harry quickly focused his own. Victor Crumb was thin, dark, and sallow-skinned, and with a large curved nose and thick black eyes. He looked like an overgrown bird of prey. It was hard to believe that he was only 18. "And now, please greet the Irish national Quidditch team," yelled Bagman, "presenting Connolly, Ryan, Troy, Mullet, Moran, Quigley, and Lynch." 7 green blurs swept onto the pitch. Harry spun a small dial on the side of his omniculars and slowed the players down enough to read the word Firebolt on each of their brooms to see their names embroidered in silver upon their backs. "And here, all the way from Egypt, our referee, acclaimed chair wizard of the International Association of Quidditch, Hassan Mustafa." A small and skinny wizard, completely bald, but with a mustache to rival Uncle Vernon's, wearing robes of pure gold to match the stadium, strode out onto the pitch. A silver whistle was protruding from under the mustache, and he was carrying a large wooden crate under one arm, his broomstick under the other. Harry spun the speed dial on his omniculars back to normal, watching closely as Mustafa mounted his broomstick and kicked the crate open. 4 balls burst into the air, the scarlet quaffle, the 2 black bludgers, and, Harry saw it for the briefest moment before it sped out of sight, the minuscule winged golden snitch. With a sharp blast on his whistle, Mustafa shot into the air after the ball. "They're off!" screamed Bagman. "And it's Mullet, Troy, Moran, Dimitrov, back to Mullet, Troy, Levski, Moran." It was Quidditch as Harry had never seen it played before. He was pressing his omniculars so hard to his eyes that his glasses were cutting into the bridge of his nose. The speed of the players was incredible. The chasers were throwing the quaffle to each other so fast that Bagman only had time to say their names. Harry spun the slow dial on the right of his omniculars again, pressed the play-by-play button on the top, and he was immediately watching in slow motion, while glittering purple lettering flashed across the lenses, and the noise of the crowd pounded against his eardrums. Hawkshead, attacking formation, he read, as he watched the 3 Irish chasers zoom closely together, Troy in the center, slightly ahead of Mullet and Moran. Bearing down upon the Bulgarians, Porkov's ploy flashed up next, as Troy made as though to dart upwards with the quaffle, drawing away the Bulgarian chaser Ivanova and dropping the quaffle to Moran. One of the Bulgarian beaters, Volkov, swung hard at a passing bludger with his small club, knocking it into Moran's path. Moran ducked to avoid the bludger and dropped the quaffle, and Levski, soaring beneath, caught it. "Troy scores!" roared Bagman, and the stadium shuddered with a roar of applause and cheers. 10-0 to Ireland. "What?" Harry yelled, looking wildly around through his omniculars. "But Levski's got the quaffle." "Harry, if you're not going to watch at normal speed, you're going to miss things," shouted Hermione, who was dancing up and down, waving her arms in the air while Troy did a lap of honor of the pitch. Harry looked quickly over the top of his omniculars and saw that the leprechauns watching from the sidelines had all risen into the air again and formed the great glittering shamrock. Across the pitch, the Vila were watching them sulkily. Furious with himself, Harry spun his speed dial back to normal as play resumed. Harry knew enough about Quidditch to see that the Irish chasers were superb. They worked as a seamless team, appearing to read each other's minds by the way they positioned themselves, and the rosette on Harry's chest kept squeaking their names, Troy, Mullet, Moran, and within 10 minutes Ireland had scored twice more, bringing their lead to 30-0, and causing a thunderous tide of roars and applause from the green-clad supporters. The match became still faster, but more brutal. Volkov and Volchanov, the Bulgarian beaters, were whacking the bludger as fiercely as possible at the Irish chasers, and were starting to prevent them using some of their best moves. Twice they were forced to scatter, and then, finally, Ivanova managed to break through their ranks, dodge the keeper, Ryan, and score Bulgaria's first goal. "Fingers in your ears," bellowed Mr. Weasley as the Vila started to dance in celebration. Harry screwed up his eyes too. He wanted to keep his mind on the game. After a few seconds, he chanced to glance at the pitch. The Vila had stopped dancing, and Bulgaria were again in possession of the quaffle. Dimitrov, Levski, Dimitrov, Ivanova. "Oh, I say," roared Bagman. 100,000 wizards and witches gasped as the 2 seekers, Crumb and Lynch, plummeted through the center of the chasers so fast that it looked as though they had just jumped from airplanes without parachutes. Harry followed their descent through the omniculars, squinting to see where the snitch was. "They're going to crash!" screamed Hermione next to Harry. She was half right. At the very last second, Victor Crumb pulled out of the dive and spiraled off. Lynch, however, hit the ground with a dull thud that could be heard throughout the stadium. A huge groan rose from the Irish seats. "Fool," moaned Mr. Weasley. "Crumb was fainting." "It's time out," yelled Bagman's voice, as trained meta-wizards hurry onto the pitch to examine Aidan Lynch. "He'll be okay. He only got ploughed," Charlie said reassuringly to Ginny, who was hanging over the side of the box looking horror-struck. Which is what Crumb was after, of course. Harry hastily pressed the replay and play-by-play buttons on his omniculars, twiddled the speed dial, and put them back up to his eyes. He watched as Crumb and Lynch dived again in slow motion. "Wronski faint, dangerous seeker diversion," read the shining purple lettering across his lenses. He saw Crumb's face contorted with concentration as he pulled out of the dive just in time while Lynch was flattened, and he understood. Crumb hadn't seen the snitch at all. He was just making Lynch copy him. Harry had never seen anyone fly like that. Crumb hardly looked as though he was using a broomstick at all. He moved so easily through the air that it looked as though he was unsupported and weightless. Harry turned his omniculars back to normal and focused them on Crumb. He was circling high above Lynch, who was now being revived by meta-wizards with cups of potion. Harry, focusing still more closely upon Crumb's face, saw his dark eyes darting all over the ground 100 feet below. He was using the time while Lynch was revived to look for the snitch without interference. Lynch got to his feet at last, to loud cheers from the green-clad supporters, mounted his firebolt and kicked back off into the air. His revival seemed to give Ireland new heart. When Mustafa blew his whistle again, the chasers moved into action with a skill unrivaled by anything Harry had seen so far. After 15 more fast and furious minutes, Ireland had pulled ahead by 10 more goals. They were now leading by 130 points to 10, and the game was starting to get dirtier. As Mullet shot towards the goalpost yet again, clutching the quaffle tightly under her arm, the Bulgarian keeper, Zograf, flew out to meet her. Whatever happened was over so quickly that Harry didn't catch it, but a scream of rage from the Irish crowd and Mustafa's long, shrill whistle blast told him that it had been a foul, and Mustafa takes the Bulgarian keeper to task for cobbing, excessive use of elbows,